So about an hour ago, the remaining networks called the election for Joe Biden for president, Kamala Harris for vice president. It's a historic day on so many levels. Uh, Unlike a lot of people who are crying and dancing and all of that, I'm a bit numb, I have to say, and I wanted to just record my thoughts, mostly so I'm going to remember it a while from now, years from now, because I've never seen anything like this. I thought that the election of President Barack Obama in 2008 was going to be the most historic and charged election and election day and night that I would ever see in my lifetime. Uh, I don't think any of us saw something coming like this, the election of 2020 in the middle of a pandemic. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what's happened and what we're facing and some raw politics and try to make some sense of it, the meaning of it all, or at least how I feel about it. Right now, first of all, it's been a historic turnout, record turnout, the biggest turnout since, I think, the election of 1900, certainly since 1908. And Joe Biden has earned 80 million votes. They're still counting. They're still counting. He's earned 80 million votes. He's up by about 4 million votes, I believe, right now. It's just the most votes any candidate in the history of our country has earned. And it's fascinating for a number of reasons. First of all, there's a pandemic going on, and even though voting was made easier through the mail, people chose to vote through the mail, and toward the end, a whole hell of a lot of them, and I was a poll observer watching in Phoenix, Arizona, they walked their ballots in. They took the time to drop them off for fear that the Postal Service wasn't going to come through. Also, Joe Biden was not the most incredibly exciting candidate in the history of presidential politics. He's run twice before and got no traction in either of those races. He's had an incredible political career, but he's not somebody that has this overwhelming charisma, no matter where you sit on the political spectrum. A ton of people respect him who feel the same way as I just outlined. But some of the raw politics of that get really interesting, and also the way that African Americans controlled this election in the primary, and I would say to a good extent in the general election, and that's still going on because we have two huge Senate seats in Georgia that are going to go to a runoff on January 5th, and it will determine the majority in the U.S. Senate. The Democrats have an uphill climb to win those two seats. If they did, the Senate will be 50-50, and now that Joe Biden is president and Kamala Harris will be presiding over the Senate officially when needed, she would be the tie-breaking vote. Democrats got clocked in this election in the U.S. House. They were supposed to gain, this potentially blue wave, their majority in the U.S. House, and they didn't. They're going to lose net between 7 and 11 seats. They still control the House, but they lost. And in the Senate, this thing is razor close, razor sharp, or pick another cliche. That's how close it is. And again, going back to African Americans and the role that they played in this election. First of all, Joe Biden was going down the tubes in the primaries until South Carolina. A lot of people remember this. And even before Jim Clyburn, in the Democratic leadership, a legendary congressman from South Carolina, even before he came out and endorsed Joe Biden, the night before there was a town hall, and somebody in the audience, a black pastor, asked Joe Biden about the terrible shooting incident that claimed so many lives in a church in South Carolina a couple years ago. I'm not going to use his name, but an ill white person came in loaded and killed a lot of people in South Carolina. And this pastor asked Joe Biden, how do you turn something like that into a positive? And this is just a fastball straight over the plate for Joe Biden, who, is often not the most articulate politician. But when it comes to grief and it comes to survival and resilience, this is right in his wheelhouse. And he knocked it out of the park. And James Clyburn, Congressman James Clyburn, endorsed Joe Biden, and then Joe Biden won that primary in South Carolina when people had left him for dead. Trust me, the betting odds on him at that point had gone way down from his performances in New Hampshire and Iowa. And so African American voters played a huge role in getting him the nomination, and turning out in Georgia and Pennsylvania and many other places. Now, there's been some talk and some early exit polls about how much Trump won of the African American vote and the Latino vote. We'll see how that pans out. You know, what it comes when there's more study, and a lot of those polls, as we've learned again and again, all over again in this election, are not always terribly reliable. Some are not. But it's undeniable, and with the overall turnout and where the Democrats needed African American turnout and didn't get it 4 years ago, that has come through, and it's a big reason that Joe Biden became president. Now, where this gets even more interesting is these two Senate seats in Georgia that are going to go to this special election. African Americans turned out in big numbers in Georgia, and it's razor close right now, and it's probably going to go Joe Biden's way. I believe the networks called it more because of Pennsylvania, but Joe Biden will probably carry Georgia the first time since Bill Clinton did this in 1992, I believe. We're talking about 28 years. We're talking about 7 presidential elections. And in that state, Stacey Abrams, who a lot of people will recognize her name, she was the minority leader in the Georgia House, and then she ran for governor. And 2 years ago, she lost by, I think, about 1%, maybe 1 to 1.5%. And there were a lot of documented problems in that election. And they're still being investigated. In fact, I had on my podcast a woman named Sarah Teal who did a whole documentary on HBO, The Cyber War on America's Elections, and showed what happened in Georgia. So whether that's, depending on how much of that is true or not, Stacey Abrams, after losing that race, dedicated herself to creating a political organization that was going to be about election security, but also about organizing Democrats, and particularly African Americans, and have them turn out in as high a number as possible in future elections. So, in fact, she's a banner. She's almost like a political organization with a few of them under that. Some are for GOTV, Get Out the Vote. Some are for voter registration. And I think one is even a political action committee that raises money to support these causes. Now, Stacey Abrams also wanted to be vice president, and she sort of openly campaigned on that in the media, which ruffled some feathers in the Democratic primary days. Now, or even in the early general election days before a vice presidential nominee was picked. It's amazing, in politics, you want to go higher and you're ambitious and you want to have a bigger job, and people criticize you for doing that. In every other aspect of life where you're trying to be better and exceed to a higher place and be successful and have more, for whatever it is, for more income or for influence or for more fulfillment, it's okay. But in politics, you get criticized. Stacey Abrams didn't get that nomination, but she continued to work. And all that work that she put in for 2 years turned out a lot of voters in Georgia. And look what happened. And now look what's happening. There's roughly another 60 days, 55, 60 days till January 5th, the special election where these 2 seats are going to be up. It's an uphill climb for Democrats in Georgia. And Stacey Abrams is almost one of the most powerful people in America for the next 2 months, because this will determine whether the Democrats have control of the White House and the Senate and the House, and can do what they want, because they will drop the filibuster if they need to, I believe, to 51 votes, just the way Mitch McConnell did on confirming judges. And I wrote about this in Unlock Congress. That's a whole other story. The filibuster requires 60 votes instead of a basic majority to get things done in the Senate. And I believe it's unconstitutional and also counterproductive. And now, 5 years after I wrote this, Mitch McConnell did drop that hammer to 51 and got 3 judges confirmed. And the Democrats, if they get that majority, they can do the same thing for the one remaining thing that you need 60 votes for, and that's passing legislation. And I've written about this, and even Barack Obama, I believe it was during John Lewis's funeral service when he gave a speech, he talked about how if Democrats need to, get rid of the filibuster. You want to get things done, and it's come to this, and voting rights are being shredded and everything else we care about, you got to play hardball. Why would you let the other side play hardball and not play hardball yourself? But the first thing is that you have to get those 2 Senate seats. And Stacey Abrams is going to be instrumental, just like the way she was in this election, all her hard work. So I think that those 2 things are really fascinating about this election. Now, the other thing is you have an argument in the Democratic Party, as is frequently the case, between the moderates, the center-left Democrats, and the more progressive, further to the left Democrats, right? This is a perennial thing when it comes to especially the Democratic Party. Going back to Rahm Emanuel, when he was chair of the Democratic House, the Congressional Campaign Committee, it was his job in 2006 to get Democrats to regain the House. That was the last congressional race that I managed in 2006. And Rahm Emanuel recruited candidates around the country to fit their district, to be able to be competitive in their district. And the Democrats won the House and the Senate that year for the first time in 12 years. And that's why Barack Obama had a majority in the House and Senate when he came into office in 2008 for 2 years. And right now you have some stuff going back and forth between some of the high-ranking officials or members of Congress that are further to the left, more progressive, and center-left. Because the Democrats did poorly this week in the House. They lost seats. But here's the thing, and this is what I find really interesting, going back to Joe Biden. He was nominated, and there were a lot of people like me who wanted him to be nominated, even though I myself didn't find him to be the most inspirational candidate in that whole bunch. 25 people at one point were running for the Democratic nomination. But a lot of us wanted Joe Biden to be nominated because he's a highly experienced person, because he is more center-left, moderate, whatever you want to call it. He is a pragmatist who gets things done. That's his background. And also, by definition of being a pragmatist, he's not viewed as far left. And a lot of us, and I believe a lot of African Americans in South Carolina who were thinking this, knew that job one, if you oppose this president, Donald Trump, is to get rid of him. That's the first thing you have to do. So how do you do it? Some people argue that don't get somebody that's too vanilla like Joe Biden. You need a passionate candidate. Don't make that mistake like Mitt Romney and the Democrats, or you know, some even would say Hillary Clinton, even though she won by 2.8 million votes. There's a lot of examples in this in history. Robert Dole in '96 was a terrible presidential candidate, even though a lot of people have high respect for him as a Republican senator. You got to get somebody who's passionate and all that. That's what a lot of folks think. But these are not normal times. This is not a normal election. President Trump is not a normal president, and the way that people felt about him is not normal. Put the anger, by comparison, to put the anger people had for George W. Bush, people on the left, to shame. This was much higher. And so by nominating Joe Biden, a lot of us felt like, you know, look, he knows how to do the job. He's been a senator for decades and was vice president and in the room with President Obama. He is qualified to do the job. He may not get you all filled up when you listen to him speak. And, you know, some of his answers may be less desirable than you'd like in a debate, whatever. Nobody's perfect, and Joe Biden isn't, and even Joe Biden says that about himself. You know, he's called himself a gaffe machine. This is not some secret. But by nominating him, you made the election, the general election, a referendum on Donald Trump. Most elections of sitting presidents, of incumbents, are referendums on them anyway. You got to see what they did for 4 years, and you are deciding, do I want another 4 years of that person, of their policies, of their track record, or not? And having it be about Donald Trump made this easier to turn out, a lot of us believe, so many people, left, right, or center, to get rid of him and have an acceptable alternative. And by the way, Joe Biden could be a great president. This may be the perfect moment for his brand of reconciliation, of moderation, of listening, of decency, all the things that we haven't had the last 4 years. This is almost universally agreed upon. It's a tough climb. It's a tall order what Joe Biden has to do. But the raw politics of that are fascinating, and it just might be the right time. I want to say something about where the country is and how I feel about it and what I hope happens now that Joe Biden's been at least called for president. We still have to have the electors cast their votes and go through all those official operations before inauguration. And a lot of us are concerned about that for reasons that are a bit arcane and that I'm not going to go into right now. But This is a unique moment in history. I'm 53 years old. I was 1 year old in 1968 when there was the last year that was near as tumultuous as this year, and it was. The Tet Offensive happened that escalated tensions in this country, a divided country over the war in Vietnam. Assassinations robbed us, stole Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy in that same year, which was devastating. And in that same year, in that presidential election, you had the governor of Alabama, who was an avowed segregationist, carry 5 states, win 9 million votes in the presidential election, and carry 5 states. And so I was only not even a little kid at that point. I was a toddler, and I never thought, when I got to be a young adult, I never thought I'd see anything like this in my lifetime, a year like this, much less a president elected like Donald Trump. But we did see that this year. It's an incredibly tumultuous year, and one election is not going to fix all that. Not one man, one woman is not going to fix all that. Right? This is a historic election. Kamala Harris becoming vice president, an African American, a person of color becoming vice president, and a woman becoming vice president. Those are both historic things. And just getting rid of Donald Trump in its own way is historic, and the way the world views us. But at the same time, I have to say, I have learned as much as I can to try to understand the people that support Donald Trump, some of them. And this upsets some people that I know who are like me, vehemently opposed to Donald Trump. Well, how could you see things through their eyes, and how could you accept any one of them? It's very hard. It's very hard. And I have made the argument that I've quoted Ta-Nehisi Coates, who said, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said that not everybody who voted for Donald Trump is a racist, but they felt it acceptable to turn over the White House to someone who's a white supremacist. So it's very hard to reconcile that. I'm someone who worked at the Anti-Defamation League 20 years ago before I went into politics. It's very hard to reconcile that with understanding the motivations of millions of people who supported Donald Trump. But I think that once, it's also very hard during an election year, right? This is hopefully over now that it's been called, and hopefully everything goes according to plan, and there's an inauguration in 2 months. But it's very hard when you're working so hard to eliminate one person, one ideology, or one performance. In the case of Donald Trump, the things that he's done, the way he's made a lot of our country feel, not just Democrats, certainly a lot of people in the middle and a lot of Republicans I know. But of course, at the same time, he's tens of millions of people that supported him. And I think, though, that even as hard as it is to understand those folks and how they feel, I think that right now it's more important than ever. The first thing I wrote 10 minutes after the election was called, I posted, was that I'm thrilled for the children of this country and children around the world, because this is their world. But also that I wrote that it's no time to gloat. It's a time to reset, and there is a ton of work to even begin the healing process in this country and to rebuild the United States. And one person can't do it. 2 people can't do it. The government alone can't do it. Even if you got every single person you wanted elected, it starts with us, each one of us. And that's really hard. That's really hard. And especially for a lot of us who feel like we've been offended every day for the last 4 years. But there are also people on the other side who supported Donald Trump who have felt ignored or put down or not listened to for a long time, 5 years ago, I published Unlock Congress, a book about repairing the U.S. Congress. Regardless of party, it was about the rules that make it harder for them to get anything done, that jack the partisanship up on both sides and make it harder to negotiate in good faith and have honest conversations between our lawmakers. Now, that was on tax day. This was released in 2015. And 2 months later, Donald Trump came down the escalator and said what he said. Rapists and criminals called Mexicans rapists and criminals, and then we've been, on that track for 5 years. So even though my book did get a lot of coverage, because I really just pushed as hard as I could to get my ideas out there, and because I have some familiarity with the media, there really hasn't been a national discussion about those reforms, about how our House districts are rigged, about how money controls the system, about how the filibuster is an accident of history and is basically unconstitutional. But these things still really matter. And I'll tell you, here's a perfect example of just how much they matter, and Republicans will be happy about this. As I said, the Republicans won in the House. They also crushed Democrats in the state legislature elections. The Democrats were trying to win back state legislatures in Texas, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. This would have been a big deal because every 10 years, after every census, every 10 years, the House districts are redrawn, gerrymandered, because the party who has power in the states, they draw the lines, and it's still legal. It's not legal to gerrymander based on racial gerrymandering, but politically, it still is. Now, at the same time this week, Virginia passed a reform saying you can't gerrymander anymore. They did pass that, but that's one state. And in Missouri, they kind of went backwards on a reform they'd made. And because the Republicans won in those places, and they also flipped New Hampshire, they flipped control of the New Hampshire House and Senate. Because the Republicans did so well in the state legislatures and are going to redraw the maps, have the power to redraw the maps, they are going to have control of this process for 175 seats in the U.S. House. I wrote this down. And Democrats are going to control 47. 175 seats to 47 seats. This is a big deal. This is a big victory for Republicans, the same way it was 10 years ago. And they knew it. They had a project called Project Red Map. They announced it. We are going to win back all these seats in these legislatures so that we can draw the lines after 2010 and have the map basically rigged toward our favor. And they're going to do it again. So this country is very split. No matter what happens in the Senate, even if the Democrats won those 2 Georgia seats and controlled all 3 branches of the federal government, it won't be for long because of the state legislatures. We are a divided country, mostly along urban and rural lines. It's almost that and culture almost precedes the ideology of the parties. And this is a tragic thing for the country. And it's not something that's easy to get past. There aren't any easier answers to this. And when I wrote that book, those weren't easy answers. Those were changing the rules to try to, I don't want to say incrementally, but make things better one at a time. Make the system function better. Because it used to function better. The Congress used to do big things. And they did it in bipartisan fashion. Not Obamacare, where it's one party split and not a single vote for it. We passed civil rights legislation. We built a federal highway system with split government. The Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, even the New Deal, if I'm not mistaken, was not passed strictly along party lines. We were in a depression, and the country knew it had to come together, and our officials that were elected knew they had to work together. It's very rare these days. And I'm hoping that we get a reset on that, but it's not likely, to be honest. It is not likely. And the partisan in me that wants more progressive policies hopes like hell that the Democrats take those 2 seats that Stacey Abrams is going to be helping them compete in January. But this is really tough stuff. It's really tough stuff. And as idealistic as it sounds, or naive as it sounds, I still do believe that it starts with us. Each one of us. It can be easy to want to gloat and say, you guys were so wrong, and look how many votes Joe Biden won by. And look at the historic count that historic number of votes that he earned versus any candidate in history. But there's much more to it than that. And Democrats, progressives, people on the left are right to celebrate, but celebrating and gloating and celebrating is one thing. Gloating and putting people down are another. And it's not going to be good for our democracy or our country and the things that we want for the future and for our kids in the long run. And it's not easy. It's not easy because a lot of us, like I said, have felt trampled on for 4 years, but other people have felt trampled on previous to that. Now, there's only one person that has really the reach to say something like this and try to bring people together, and it's the president. The President Trump has had, I mean, the presidency in the United States is an unparalleled platform in the world. In the world, even the countries that laugh at us or are pitying us, they still look to us, and they watched us this week. So I fully expect Joe Biden tonight in his speech and in his inaugural speech and in future speeches and deeds and word and deeds. I think that even though he's going to be pushing policies that he campaigned on, which are Democratic, because he's a Democrat, I do believe he's genuine in wanting to be a president for everyone and wanting people to look at each other in a different way than we have been. He will deliver that message. It may not sound as inspiring as Barack Obama or Ronald Reagan or Bill Clinton or FDR or choose your rock star president, but it's sincere, and he has the moral authority to talk about it that way because it's kind of the life that he's lived. And I'm hoping that Americans will listen and that we'll open our minds up a bit and that we'll be waving at our neighbors and smiling at our neighbors, no matter what their political affiliation, or in particular, if we know there's an opposing political affiliation. Now, of course, the other side has to do the same, and I'm not saying I'm completely optimistic about either side doing that, but I hope for it, and so I wanted to say it, and I wanted to just get those thoughts off my mind on this historic day. I was on the phone a few weeks ago with one of the highest-ranking officials in the Biden for President campaign about doing some GOTV, get out the vote, work with them, and I was really impressed by how calm and professional they were, even when we were disagreeing or trying to get something done, and it wasn't all coming together like that. They were so classy and graceful. And I think that they have been through this whole campaign. And I think that even in the words of the vice president before this election was called, the last few days, his speeches, they were well-timed and the tone of them was excellent. And I have no reason to think that that won't continue by and large. So I did a little poll observation and a few phone calls, but I know who the real heroes are because I used to work in these campaigns, and they're the people that work 80 hours a week, some of them paid, some of them not. I hope that they are enjoying every minute of this because it's an enormous accomplishment at a hinge point in American history. And I am so grateful to all of them for what they did. Thanks for listening, everybody. Unify as best we can. It starts now.